¿Qué pasó, mi gente? It's Mark Tip 25 otra vez. As far as my predictions in the previous round, before I get into the second round, I had OKC beating the Grizzlies 4-1, but it seemed that the Thunder were just way too strong. The Grizzlies had nothing going on for them in this series, so the Thunder just completely swept them. Um, in the Denver versus Clippers series that ended in a pretty interesting fashion, the Nuggets kind of just destroyed the Clippers in that final game. I originally had the Nuggets winning this game, the series in six, but the Clippers, had a little bit more fight in them that I originally had anticipated due to mainly Kawhi Leonard. And let's be honest, I think Kawhi Leonard really did a lot in this series, but it just wasn't enough considering who he had around him. But the Nuggets are moving on to the second round. So for the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the LA Lakers, I had the Lakers originally winning this series, but the Timberwolves just completely dismantled them. This Lakers team wasn't as ready as I had anticipated. Um, and, JJ Redick made a few mistakes, but in the end, I just think there was just a lot more issues than just the coaching. Luca did a lot in this series, but it just it wasn't enough. LeBron is really aging, and it's just not enough. This team needs a way more around them in order to move on. And the Timberwolves were just way too good on the defensive end. Rudy Gobert had a really strong showing in that final game, and Anthony Edwards is just playing out of his mind. So we'll see what happens in the next round. For the Rockets and the Warriors, they're still tied and they have yet to play their game seven, which starts today. I'm getting ahead of this because the Eastern Conference second round starts today as well. So I'm just wanting to give my prediction ahead of time before that starts. So the Rockets and the Warriors, I had the Rockets winning this series in six, but the Warriors had a little bit more fight than I thought. However, I still maintain that the Rockets are going to move on to the next round. But I was still wrong in the idea that the Warriors weren't going to make this more of a series. So for the Eastern Conference first round, I had the Cavaliers beating the Heat in six, but the Heat just were no match at all for the Cavaliers, and they completely destroyed them in that final game. So it was just a complete, utter domination and clean sweep all around. For the Pacers, I had them winning exactly, as a matter of fact, 4-1. The Bucks just couldn't get it done. Lillard also got injured again, so that's very unfortunate. So yeah, I just think the Pacers just had their number. The Knicks, I had the Knicks beating the Pistons in five, but the Pistons showed a little bit more fight, and it actually almost went the distance, but due to a controversial call, it ended up going the Knicks' way. So yeah, unfortunately, it I was incorrect on this one. But the Pistons are looking like they're going to be a really solid team going into next season. I had the Celtics beating the Magic in six, but the Magic kind of crumbled in one of those other games. So the Celtics ended up getting the upper hand in five games. Now, for my predictions in the second round, starting with the Thunder versus the Nuggets, considering that the Nuggets went the distance in the previous round against the Clippers, I think there's going to be some signs of fatigue there. However, I'm not going to completely count them out because Nikola Jokic, when you have him on your team, anything's possible. Aaron Gordon has been playing really well. Russell Westbrook has been surprisingly having some good showings in the previous series. So hopefully that carries on to the next round. And Jamal Murray, he's been kind of on and off, but still a very dangerous player. For the Thunder, though, they just, completely swept their previous round, and they're a very strong team. I think they're poised to move on. I think, though, that this goes the distance, but I think the little bit of fatigue is going to kind of work in the favor of the Thunder. So the Thunder is going to win this series in seven games. Um, so the Timberwolves, whoever they face versus whether it be the Warriors or the Rockets, I think the Timberwolves still ultimately end up moving on. Should the Warriors win, I think it ends up going to five games because, again, I just don't think the Warriors have enough weapons to keep the Timberwolves players at bay, and their size is not enough. Even if they put Kevon Looney against Gobert, I just don't think it's going to be enough. Um, Yeah, and just the rotations that Steve Kerr has put on the floor are very head scratchingly weird. Should the Rockets be the ones to move on against the Timberwolves, I think that goes to 6 games because I think the Rockets are a bit of a younger squad, so I think they can match up a little bit more energy wise with the Timberwolves. But I still think ultimately the Timberwolves just have the upper hand. Rudy Gobert is a really good defensive player. Julius Randle has actually been playing very well in these playoffs this far. And, Anthony Edwards is going to do what he's going to do. For the eastern side of the playoffs, we have the Cavaliers versus the Pacers. The Cavaliers were really strong in that previous series. Granted, the Miami Heat were not really much of competition. However, this is also bearing in mind that, Darius Garland wasn't even playing a good amount of that series. So I think with him being back into the lineup, I think that's going to give the Pacers a lot of problems. Not to say that the Pacers are not going to hold their own. They've been doing really well with their squad and, with Rick Carlisle at the helm. I ultimately think that this goes to 6 games. However, I wouldn't be surprised if it went to 5, but I'm going to be conservative here, considering how crazy this team was against that Heat, even without Darius Garland. So yeah, I think the Cavaliers move on to the conference finals against whoever wins between the Knicks and the Celtics. And speaking of the Knicks and the Celtics, the Knicks kind of scraped by. As I stated earlier, there was a controversial call, and they kind of made it a little harder than it needed to be against a young Pistons team. And again, this is not to say that the Pistons aren't a good team. I just think the Knicks made a lot of costly mistakes that I think might end up hurting them in this round against the Celtics. Um, Granted, they're going to be really good offensively, but I just think defensively the Celtics have a lot more weapons at their disposal. And I think ultimately the Celtics win this series in 5 games. Wouldn't be surprised if it did go to 6, but I just think considering how many mistakes that they tend to make and just how they're not as good of a defensive team as the Celtics, I just think the Celtics have that, the championship pedigree, they have the experience. I just think ultimately the Celtics win this series going to the conference finals against the Cavaliers. So we have the Celtics and Cavaliers in the conference finals for the East, and we'll have the Thunder and the Timberwolves in the West. Alrighty, let me know what you think in the comments section, mi gente. Hasta la próxima. Paz.